Twitch, and Twitch. Please like, share, and follow and subscribe. And you can join the conversation at 313-315-6018. And I am one of your hosts, Dr. T, and we are joined with Dr.
Fishta.
Fishta. Yes, Dr. Fisher, you've been gone for a little while, haven't you?
I know, and I'm happy to be back.
It is good to have
Yes,
you back
yes.
in this new year,
I'm
and we're
tired.
still in this pandemic.
Yes, tired of staying at home. I can't wait to get out and hoping this vaccine it's moving forward as fast as possible. The city of Detroit recently made
Yes.
some movements, so looking forward to better days to come. And also being back on a day like today after yesterday, it's also
Oh my goodness. We're going to have a whole show about that on
That's correct.
February the 4th. So
That's
join us
correct.
on February the 4th with Dr. Matthew Glowiak. We'll be having that real deep conversation.
and talking mainly about psychological effects that some of these events can have on people. And sometimes people can be isolated, not even understand what's happening, and feel even more isolated,
Exactly.
alone, and frightened, and so forth. So more to come in that way, and looking forward to that conversation.
Yes, but today we are talking about human trafficking. I don't know if you all are aware, but January it has been dedicated here in Michigan as Human Trafficking Awareness Month. So we will be having that discussion. We will be joined by Jane P. White, who is the CEO of the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force. So she will be joining us in shortly. So, but before we have her come on to the show, we know that human trafficking is a major issue. It's not something that is new. It's been around for centuries, actually.
As
but
long as people have been around, human
Exactly.
trafficking has been around.
Exactly,
Correct.
but we didn't call it that.
Correct.
So now this is the new term that we're throwing around for individuals who have been taken for purposes of trafficking them.
Correct, and I want to also give out some basic information. There's a national hotline for human trafficking, 888-373-7888, and also through text at 233-733. National hotline can be contacted if you are a victim, or if you think you know someone who could be a victim.
Yes, I've been working with a family whose daughter is suspected of being human trafficked, and her name is Amira Hall. Her mother is April Hall, and I've been working with Miss Hall and the Detroit Human Trafficking Task Force, the police department. I don't know if people are aware, but the Detroit Police Department has a human trafficking task force.
That's correct. And
So-
Michigan, state of Michigan does as well, and the National Human Trafficking Task Force as well.
Exactly. So we've been working hard trying to get Amira Hall back. I wish I had a picture that I could show of Amira. So if people saw her had sightings of her in Detroit, the east side of Detroit, near 8 Mile and Gratiot area at a hotel over there. We also had sightings in Canton over by 275 in Michigan. So and even Amira, if you are out there and you hear us, please call your mom if you can. Let her know if you're safe or not. So please try to reach out. But we want to make sure that we bring awareness to this issue because so many people have come up missing in suspected human trafficking, and there's many forms of human trafficking, and I want Jane to kind of go over some of that with us.
And state of Michigan, within the last, dozen years or so, they really been working hard on increasing awareness. There's also now a rule that for us health license providers, we all have every year, we have to have evidence of human trafficking training.
Right.
And that includes identifying signs and symptoms that someone could be trafficked, and also what to do about it, including an assessment in that area directly once you see signs and symptoms. And it's very important. I believe also a couple of years ago, Michigan was one of the higher states in the nation with the human trafficking, even though many people may not be aware of that. So
Yes, we've been ranging in like the last few years, maybe last 5 years or so, anywhere from number 2 to 10th in the nation
that's correct.
for
And
human
only
trafficking.
when you look at when we were number 2 or number 3, we were surpassed by California, which is obviously 3 times the size of our state. And to think that our state has such a high number of human trafficking is frightening.
Yeah, but we have to realize Michigan is almost like a hub because we are surrounded by 2 different states,
Yep.
well, 3 actually, that you can get to very quickly
Correct.
within 45 minutes,
Yep.
and then a whole country that you can get to in 7 minutes.
Yep, there's been a couple major operations through the state, Michigan State Police, FBI, and many Michigan young folks were being human trafficked to Chicago actually for sex, which was very disheartening to read the article on that topic. So. And again, when we're talking about human trafficking, we're talking about something that involves the use of force or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex, and oftentimes.
Well, I'm not going to just leave it to sex because with human trafficking, it's not limited to sex.
Correct.
You
You
know?
have the labor, right?
You have labor, you have organs.
Correct.
So there's multiple stages when we're talking about human trafficking. Most people are more familiar with the sex trafficking,
Yep.
and they think that it's geared more toward women,
Correct.
and not realizing that young boys
Yep.
are human trafficked.
Yep.
And seniors. I've gone out to senior buildings and given free workshops to talk to them about the dangers and risk of human trafficking just for, their own purposes because they don't think that they can be victims, but they can be.
Sure. And another population at risk is also the immigrants that are often forced to labor. And traffickers, they use violence, they can use threats, deception, and sometimes they use the debt in order to turn someone into being trafficked, so to speak. So it's a major issue, and again, we're here to bring awareness to this, and we're going to have Miss White coming online, who does this for living, so to speak, and excited to talk to her and pick her brain around this topic.
Me too. I did, and this is how I met Jane. We did a workshop together for Ford Motor Company out at the Rossonville plant, and we presented, she and 2 other women from different organizations and myself had the opportunity to talk to some Ford employees about human trafficking, and I was so shocked to see how involved that Ford Motor Company was with not just educating their employees, but them actually assisting, like the truck drivers. One of the truck drivers actually told a story of how he helped a woman who was going to be trafficked and was able to get her into his vehicle and get her to a safe place. So I was really amazed that he even knew the signs and what to look for.
Yep.
So they do an excellent job with training their
That
employees.
is one of those scenarios. There is this organizational psychology field that's been fairly newer, up and coming, and many of the big companies are actually hiring organizational psychologists, and in part what they do, they assess their employees' direct involvement or indirect involvement in areas that they can help and benefit with their mental health and otherwise. So they have identified this an issue either directly or indirectly in order to train their staff, their employees, to how to deal with these situations at different levels. That's excellent, and I wish we could see more of the health psychology in our employers, so to speak, addressing human trafficking and other mental health issues.
Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. I often well, within my services to survivors of human trafficking and provide free counseling for them. And I realized that a lot of these individuals, well, well, let me rephrase that. Some of these individuals got trapped into this while they were in school, meeting friends at school, thinking that they were, friends and
Yeah.
just going out, hanging out. And it turned into a different situation to where they start getting gifts
Yep.
and start staying out later. And then because they were giving these expensive and
Hmm.
extravagant gifts, they were asked to do favors,
Correct.
and they felt
Yep.
obligated to do these favors because they received these gifts. And after they receive the gifts to do the favor, then it's keep being asked to them, and they still live at home.
Hmm.
And this is the thing, it's happening right up underneath
Yep.
parents' noses. So if you are a parent and you have a child that is coming home with gifts, and you did not give them money, they do not have their own job, it's time to ask questions.
Yep.
Where are you getting this money?
Yep.
Where'd you get this gift from? Find out who your children are hanging
Yep.
out with. You have to find out this information because this human trafficking ring, they have this down so tight.
Yep. Yep.
You once your child gets involved in it, it's really hard for them to get out of it.
And that's the goal of these gifts and
Mm-hmm.
other gestures, right? To get someone into the circle, and once you're in it, then you're in it, and it's very difficult to get out, either through blackmailing or other means, which we've seen
Mm-hmm.
some of
And
those cases,
threatening.
and threatening and violence and all kinds of issues that will ultimately not only consume the person's life and um, interfere with their transitional stages, but it could have obviously other major mental health long-term impact as well,
That's right.
including the risk of life itself. And when you look at the populations, like you said, Dr. T, at higher risk, and when we talk about teenagers, uh, and we don't know the numbers amongst the teenagers related to pandemic or other populations, right?
Right.
It will be I am interested to know if the human trafficking has been decreased, increased, stayed the same during the pandemic here, as obviously we are more vulnerable when it comes to mental health and other various issues. So,
Absolutely.
and we'll
Absolutely.
find out. We'll see if Miss White can help us and what is she working with in her daily basis now, given
Right.
where we are.
Absolutely. Because I know there are statistics out there, and we do need to get that information out to the public. Because we know, again, like we said, human trafficking does not just affect women that are teenagers. The youngest the youngest that we've seen are infants. There are infants that are involved in this trafficking ring, and the oldest person that we've seen and rescued is 75 years old. Was 75 years old. So there's a large range when we're talking about age, and then we're not even looking at our young men that are teenagers that consider themselves homosexual,
Correct.
consider themselves gay, and then they are ostracized from their family and they're put out.
Yep.
Now they're runaway, they're on the street, and they're a target for human trafficking.
Correct. That's one side of that. The other side is when you talk about sexual ranges of sexual gender issues that they may run in with family. They also will isolate, they will hide, they will engage and relate to people who they feel they're being accepted by, which obviously can open the door and make them more vulnerable to some of this human trafficking we're talking about. And keeping in mind that traffickers are probably looking for those opportunities in order to have their prey.
Exactly. And that's exactly what they're looking for. They're looking for vulnerable individuals. And even when we're using our social media, they are looking at social media sites. They're looking at Facebook. They're looking at Instagram. They're looking at Kick and Twitch and all these
not only looking, Dr. T, they're engaging through that. So
absolutely.
you don't even have to go in someone's neighborhood and wait for them to come out so you can see them. They're engaging in ways that oftentimes, again, talking about the teen population, the parents have no clue, have no control over. Obviously, this is out of control in so many ways when it comes to the way we connect. And also, oftentimes, parents will struggle with keeping up with all this social media and the new apps and things of that nature that come up every day. I mean, Facebook is old anymore. It's for old people, right? When you talk to.
I was just
So,
telling someone that the other. I said no. Facebook is for people 40 and older. You know, you if you want the younger people, you have to go on IG, Kick, and all those other platforms to reach that population.
and also keeping in mind that the human traffickers, while the social media platforms, they try to prevent such actions, they know how to communicate, right? They use language that is not observable by these platforms, and also they can have fake age and fake
Fake age,
accounts.
fake pictures. And ladies and gentlemen, it is 5:16, and you are watching In Session live on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world. We are streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. Please like, share, and follow, as well as subscribe. And you please join the conversation at 313-355-6018. And we have a caller on the line. You are in session with Dr. T and Fishta.
Hello.
Hi, is this Jane?
It is Jane.
How are you?
I am good, and I'm so pleased that you called and that we can talk about such an important issue.
Absolutely. You know, when we decided to do this show on human trafficking, the first person I thought of was you. And I was like,
Oh,
I
how
have
nice
to
of you.
have Jane on this show.
Nice to meet you in
Well-
this virtual world, Jane.
Yeah, I'm in very good company. I can absolutely say that. So I'm pleased to be with the two of you.
All right.
Thank you.
So, Jake, tell our audience a little bit about yourself and the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force.
Well, the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force was formed about 16 years ago. It was formed while I was at Michigan State University with the School of Criminal Justice. And I read in the New York Times about two cases, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast, regarding pretty good sized what we didn't know the words trafficking were. Because being a former police officer, I really, and because I was traveling a lot all over the globe in terms of working with agencies, it was like, I can't believe I don't know about this. The issue became very clear when I gathered together a lot of police people, and we sat in a room for 1 hour, and we talked about cases that we had in which we had put people in jail or detention. And what we figured out was why we thought they were aggressors and those who committed crimes, they actually were victims of human trafficking.
Wow.
And if you could have heard the silence in the room, that what have we done in terms of not understanding this? So that's how it came about. It actually started with 20 people. It was police officers, and then we brought some social workers in, and then it evolved today where it is more than 135 agencies. All volunteer. There isn't anybody, everybody at the agencies work on their own kinds of things, but they know that we have to come together to collaborate to look at this issue that is so vital to our children, to our adults, to kinds of things that we cannot imagine could happen.
Right.
Jane, I want to ask you this. We have a couple questions, but Dr. T and I were talking before you came online. Considering that we're in the middle of a pandemic, and we were wondering, to your knowledge, has this impacted human trafficking in any way?
You win the question of the day. What happened in March changed so much the flavor of what human trafficking is, the identification of victims, and how they were operating and being used changed so dramatically. It's not that human trafficking does not exist, but the format, the procedure, the kinds of things are different. And if we thought it was hidden before, it is really hidden today in terms of things because it has gone far more to technology.
Mm-hmm.
We are still doing some familiar things that we know in terms of hotels for sexual kinds of things. For labor contract trafficking, that's still out in the open. That has not changed, which is also when we look at an issue of what does that really mean to people, particularly children who are involved in labor contracts. So when you say does it change, yes, it changed dramatically. The second thing that changed is that agencies who were actively involved, whether housing, shelter, psychological help, what other kind of services they were able to identified survivors, suddenly dried up. And those kinds of things forced people, just as businesses go out of business, we've had agencies that have had to reduce their services to victims and survivors. So, yes, it's dramatically changed, dramatically.
Now, let me ask, Jen, can you distinguish or tell us the difference between human trafficking and prostitution? Because sometimes people have a, a do not actually understand what human trafficking is and confuse the two.
I can understand that because sometimes the line is very close. First of all, if we're talking about children, and that's an important concept on the difference between trafficking and prostitution, is that the law, which has defined what human trafficking is, and that's a big consideration. So the law defines what an action is, and what they say is that no person under the age of 18 can be involved as a participant or someone guilty of sexual contact. So that means that if we talk about anyone under the age of 16 or 18 and call them they are prostituting or are a prostitute, no, that's not true. And that's been a big one for the public to accept because they think, well, a 16, 17, and 18-year-old must know this. No, because the process
Right.
of entry into trafficking is probably different. Now, we steadfastly maintain that while there probably are many who are involved in prostitution who probably were trafficked at an age in their life, but it may change into prostitution in terms of how they function, whether it's they become an independent person or they steadfastly say, this is my choice. There's no choice involved in human trafficking. So the second criteria is that choice is never an issue. And there has to be certain kinds of conditions of force, fraud, or coercion. One of those elements must be present in order for human trafficking to be defined and charged criminally.
Mm. Thank you for that clarification. I hope that kind of clarified the difference. And I know you said that children, age 18 and under, but even for adults, that can happen as well. They can be coerced, forced, and tricked into trafficking situations as well. Would you say that's true?
Absolutely. And so what differentiates that is sometimes very difficult to do because the issue is what is it that you wish to have happen? Do you wish for, do you want, is your importance the victim or survivor, that their choice is also, I don't want to do this anymore. I wish to leave.
Right.
What resources are available for me if I choose to do that? That's an important issue. If it is, I'm very happy doing what I do, and I don't wish to leave. This is my partner. If I'm involved with someone who is tempting, this is my life, this is my choice, and that becomes a different thing. So you are so correct in terms of how do we determine what it is that interference comes about, because we really have to have the recognition of the victim that someone is really drastically destroying their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So, other words, the person has to be somehow held against their will. It sounds like, Jane.
It certainly is the ability to, uh, for instance, when you hear people talking, one of the things that happens is there may be a decision by an adult, if we're talking about sexual trafficking. So I'm going to leave. So I decide to leave. But then if the person who has been my boss, who I give my earnings to, who I direct my life to, who I choose to go where he or she says I go, then the issue becomes, is that person still following me? And we find that out all the time. But often the victim or survivor feels that means they really love me.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah. So they start developing feelings for their captor.
Oh,
And
yeah.
and that's
Yep.
what
Mm-hmm.
Stockholm syndrome.
Yeah, which is huge, which is
Mm-hmm.
huge. Both in trafficking, and I suspect prostitution. I'm no expert on prostitution. In fact, we say we really don't wish to get into that because that should have equal kinds of resources and treatment availability and a reason why. Am I doing this morally because I believe that is wrong? Well, that's a path to. So I can't tell you that I would know this, but we certainly have many survivors who, as adults, we come into contact with, who tell us their life stories, and the question is always, at what point in time did they really believe they couldn't change their lives?
Jane, can you also educate us and the listeners what is, when it comes to trafficking, the part labor there? What is that like? Well, how is one human trafficked through labor?
Much of it has to do with kinds of jobs that are available to people in other countries. For instance, Michigan is a huge agriculture state. In fact, it's the second
Yep.
leading cause of how, as you well know. So I have to have workers because people from Michigan don't want to do the kinds of things that requires an agriculture growth. So often children are recruited. For instance, there's a case not very far from us that has to do with a chicken farm. 15 and 16-year-olds were recruited from South America for a promise to go to school. They were going to get schooling. And that was a big thing because they could return to their country and have a viable kind of trade. But when they got here, they didn't go to school. They worked at a chicken farm. I don't know if you've ever been on a chicken farm, but I don't think it's a very good place to be. They worked for 12 hours a day, sometimes 18 or 19 hours a day, 7 days a week, weren't allowed to go to school, were in disastrous kinds of housing. But the promise was, you're still getting money. Well, it wasn't the money that was promised them because they were charged for this horrible kinds of housing, for food that was bought for them, for transportation to the chicken farm from the shacks they were living in. And their fear was that the traffickers told them that if they tried to tell their parents what was happening, that their parents would be harmed, hurt, and not only that, but their culture would look down upon them because their families had made foolish mistakes. So agriculture, menial kinds of jobs, domestic workers taking care of children, young women, 9, 10, 11 years old who are brought over from countries as a babysitter, again, with the promise of going to school, promise of a home, returning to my homeland, making money to support families. It's the same kind of thing. We certainly have labor trafficking for adults who are American citizens, but much of that is for countries who are so poverty-stricken and so no way of getting out of a lifestyle, no way of progressing, that they know that America will provide these kinds of things based on promises that were never, ever going to be fulfilled.
Hmm. Ladies and gentlemen, you are watching In Session Live on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest station in the world, and we are streaming live on Facebook, Twitch, YouTube. So please like, share, follow, and subscribe, and join the conversation at 313-355-6018. And we have on the line with us Jane P. White, who is the CEO of the Michigan Human Trafficking Task Force. Now, Jane, locally, when we're going, like us women, we like to get our hair, our nails done, and have massages and things of that nature. Now, can we find human trafficking in those type of businesses?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up because I can't believe that I didn't even talk about that. Nail salons are infamous in terms of trafficking kinds of conditions, and there are kinds of signs in terms of what is there. Many of them are from women, particularly from Far Eastern countries, who are promoted again to come to the United States and have a trade, and they may well have do very well in their country in terms of the nail thing, but nothing like they can. So nail salons. But if you look, there are beds in the back. There is somebody that talks for them. They don't talk with their customer. If the customer tries to get too friendly with them, that person is replaced, because much of the nail salons is not your friendly neighborhood salon.
Right.
It is a cartel. Those that are here in Detroit today may be in Minneapolis tomorrow. Why? Because of something that occurred that may alert the authorities to the nail salon.
Exactly.
So the travel is big. People kind of think that the trafficking, and you, both of you, because of what you do in terms of trauma and things that it's brought out, I'm sure, with patients that you have, believe that it's a kind of unsophisticated person who's just in the community and they have a stable of 4 or 5 women or something like that. That's a form of trafficking, but that's not the big business. Trafficking is a huge, profitable business.
Right.
That's why trafficking is done. And so nail salons, convenience stores,
braid shops, even.
Yes. Well, in fact, we were in Detroit talking to some officers about some kinds of things, and one of the things we're braiding silk shops, and he said, well, there's one on my feet. And it was like, well, what's going on? And what he described was a perfect kind of thing as to where trafficking probably occurred.
Oh, wow.
Jane, Dr. T and I were talking before you come online how Michigan it's been at higher list of human trafficking in our nation, and it's troubling to us, and then it's got to be troubling to our listeners to know that. And many people didn't know until a few years ago, and I believe the law you referred to earlier was, I don't know, about a dozen years ago or so, that was implemented, the human trafficking law in Michigan. Now, why is Michigan at the top of the list there?
That also is an excellent question, because unfortunately, because we don't have the support by our government and by our communities to really go after what human trafficking is. We have no way of knowing numbers. And so there are people who put out information to sensationalize and to create, they think, something that will bring relief. But it's not. It's false. And one of them is the famous story of Michigan is number 2 in trafficking in the nation.
Mm-hmm.
There's absolutely no basis for that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, why? If one looks simply at populations, one has to look at populations of states where they have huge urban centers, even though we know in Michigan there's every county that we could probably pull a human trafficking case that has occurred. So it happens rurally. But if you're talking about numbers, then you have to look at California, New York, Florida, because they have huge population centers. So the sad issue is that we have no computerization of cases. And while I maintain it doesn't matter that we're not number 2, the point is we have large numbers of people who are both labor and sexually tracked that we can point to cases. Absolutely. And so and what happens is that we hurt victims when we pass along that information, because if I go to a foundation and say I would like $10,000 because I'm going to do some prevention work in terms of children in school in 10th grade in terms of information about human trafficking. And they say, well, I'd love to give it to you. Love to give it to you. How many trafficking cases were in Michigan last year? And I say, I don't know. And if I don't know, and members of the task force don't know, then who does? And they say, my givers want to know numbers.
Yep.
So we get hurt by that. So the greatest thing that can happen with your audience is to say, yeah, we have a very serious problem in Michigan, but let's not do the number 2 anymore.
Mm-hmm. Now, Jane, can you tell us some of the signs to look for someone who may be a victim of human trafficking?
That's a really good question, too. And, when we started this, we didn't have any idea. Like, we really, the kinds of signs that we were looking at was if they don't look you straight in the eye, well, that's kind of a silly one. And what we found out is something that actually has to do with the medical field. And the medical field has done some research as it relates to health issues that people get as they get older. And they found some common vulnerabilities that occurred, and we have looked at that as transferability to trafficking cases. Number 1, sexually assaulted as a child. Number 2, an addiction issue in the family. Number 3, one of the parents in the home in confinement. Number 4, domestic violence in the home. Number 5, poverty. But you see, that requires...
But that, Jane, actually, that doesn't sound like signs. That, to me, sounds like precursors to an individual being trafficked. But if someone is actually out there and they're being trafficked and they're in the grocery store with you, what is a sign for me to look for that person is a victim of human trafficking?
And see, that's the magic question, is that you are absolutely right. That is a precursor. That is absolutely right. But how would I know that? Because you know what? As you well know, how many patients do you see that identify that they were sexually assaulted as a child? The numbers are astounding. So when we say that, and we go into a session and say, we know in this room there are multiple people who have been sexually assaulted as a child, and as a result of that have had immense issues, particularly if they have more than one factor, that make them vulnerable. So, what it is poor self esteem, dropping out of school, getting into behavior that is suggestive, not understanding that there are people in the world via technology, for instance. Is it okay for me to put a picture on that somebody says I'd like to see a nude picture here? We had a case or lots of cases in the East Coast, and what it was is people were sending out on the internet that we can make you a model and give you a lot of money, like $25 an hour if you're interested. And they sent it via information from the yearbook.
Mm-hmm.
They sent this out to Washington, D.C. high schools. They received back 20% of the population. That 20%, the 80% didn't. The 20% that did, in looking at the background of them, not only it wasn't the fact that they were being models, it was the fact that somebody would care about them and think they were pretty and kind of thing. So the issue of what they do and how they look and how they dress is not the issue of trafficking. It is we have to identify kinds of things, and we have to talk about those issues as to when they're occurring. And when they are, then what are the resources available in terms of in the regular curriculum in school? I have a teacher tell me the other day in a session, she said, I have one girl, and I want you to know, I know she's trafficked. I know she is. She's trouble all the time. And I said, what do you mean she's trouble all the time? She said, I just break my back trying to please her, and I feel so terrible every night when I go home because I have no ability. I have 35 other kids in my room, and yet I know her vulnerability to trafficking is so high because I know what's happening at her house. Father is an alcoholic. Mother is absent half the time. And she said, I know if I had time and I talked to her that she probably has been sexually assaulted. See, the thing is, like on sexual assault, it isn't strangers who assault. It is people I know. 95% of all trafficked sexual victims have been sexually assaulted by someone they know, like a parent, a neighborhood, a brother, a sister.
Right. Well, Jane, I want to thank you for joining us today and providing us with all of this knowledge. Dr. Fishta, did you want to ask?
Yes.
Okay.
On a final note, Jane, I wanted you to tell us and our listeners what can people do if and once they suspect some form of human trafficking.
They should find out in their community what the resources are. First of all, there's always a shop at the police department. But you know what we found out? It probably is not a criminal justice issue initially. They're badly needed. But do you know where the identification comes from best?
Where's
Healthcare.
Yep.
Everybody has to go to the doctor or the emergency room or a satellite health, and that it just is now that if you go into healthcare and you, one of the questions that's asked of you is there domestic abuse in your home? Now, asking one question isn't it, but we know that training healthcare workers, whether it's emergency room, first responders, is probably as significant as it is. So that information and the best research is coming from there. So the best information as to where do I go may also come from our medical field. It also is incumbent upon the community to have some kind of collaboration in terms of gathering together. Where are the shelter homes? Call it domestic abuse shelter home. Don't give up. report it. There's also an 800 number, 888. I can't believe it.
Is it the three
Not,
seven three seven eight
yes.
eight eight? Yes, we gave that out earlier,
Yeah, yeah.
as well as availability to text it at 233-733-2417.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
That is a national number, and that comes out of Washington, D.C., but that information is chunked back to Michigan and assigned to a department, and it's the best we have right now. Is it good? No. Not when I say good, I don't mean to make that. I mean it needs more funding. I don't know how they do as well as they do. So that's always a number. Always a number. And you can look that right up on your computer if you forget it.
Mm-hmm. Now, you know what, Jen? I do want to ask another question before you go. I was doing some research on human trafficking, and just with some of the victims, they were saying had distinguishing marks or specific tattoos that related them to a particular what's the
Yeah.
term? Okay, so yeah, can you talk to us a little more about that?
Yeah, that was very prevalent in the first few years that we were involved in trafficking, that those tattoos were very evident on the face, on the mouth, on eyelids, on the back of the neck, very evident. But traffickers, while they're pretty dumb, are also smart, and they realized that identification, and they don't want their victims identified. They don't want anybody to talk to them. So the tattoos are now hidden, and the tattoos generally are marks of the trafficker. Mm-hmm. So in other words, a medical person would see the identification, whether it's on their breast, whether it's on their butt, whether it's but it's an identification of the trafficker's sign, the signature, the kind of thing there. And that's much more prevalent than the obvious. Now, the obvious is that tattoos are done by many, many young people today, not young, all ages. But you're right, and that's another thing, that things happen, and that's why it's so important to be collaborative when we work with this, is that traffickers change their mode of operation just as investigations find out kinds of things. We need police trained. We still have 40% of our police departments in Michigan who aren't trained yet.
Absolutely. Now, do you think that sometimes, and I'm not saying often, but we have officers that are also involved in these human trafficking rings?
Well, we certainly have had that in Michigan. We've had several cases. I can't tell you that they're anywhere near majority or anything like that, but we've had that. We've had that in other states, in Florida, where, again, unfortunately, officers at times, thank God it's a minority, but they go bad. Mm-hmm. It's a way of making money. It's a way of protecting where action is going on. It's just like hotels. What hotels? How many hotels do you have in your city? What's going on? Who's reporting cases? Can't you tell me that you would know that a young girl who walks in with an older man, they don't have a suitcase and they stay for 3 or 4 days, and cleaning people come in, they pick up things that look like sexual kinds of activity is going on? Come on.
Right.
Yeah.
You got to go after. You look at the famous case down in Detroit. It happens to be the Victory Motel.
Yes, the Victory Motel, right off Grand River, not too far
You
from
know,
the casino.
Yeah. How long that's been operating?
Years.
That they know of.
Years.
Well, years.
Yes.
They had. My understanding is they had like 46 rooms to rent, 4 of which were for the general public.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus
yeah.
Christ.
Really?
And the thing is, this is another factor, and this is totally unrelated, but that was one of the hotels that the American Red Cross also used when they had victims that suffered from fires and didn't have any place to go. Victory
Oh
Hotel
my.
was one of the places that they would put up there, to put up people so, or
Wow.
families. So to hear that it's all that that hotel was a place of refuge for some, but a place of distress for others, it was really shocking for me to find that out.
Yeah, and for me, the shocking thing is that there are always others who see this all the time and they're not connecting it.
Right.
And it's like, why is it when we say it's hidden? It's not always hidden. There are signs that, for instance, and this one I know that both of you know very well, is trauma,
Mhm.
and the fact that how people sometimes talk to those who are victims, that there's some belief that they may be a victim. Well, how they are talked to? Why would I ever tell you anything
Right.
about what my life has been when you're treating me so poorly?
Exactly. So when we're so even when we have officers that are engaging survivors of human trafficking, we have to teach these officers how to handle these individuals with care and compassion instead of making them feel as if they're the perpetrator and it's their fault.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. I get that. You know, I get that idea the minute I say sex, that it is illegal, and why is she dressed like that?
Right.
And it's like,
More
why is she
victim
dressed like that?
blaming.
You
Right.
understand? Somebody
Blaming the
bought her the.
victim.
Yeah,
Mhm. Yeah, and now and like you said, oftentimes they don't have the choice of what clothes they wear because they're not buying their clothes, they're not giving money to purchase clothes, so they have to wear what is given, and usually it's the attire of another victim that left that stuff there because they had to go in a rush and be shipped off somewhere else. So they
that's
don't even
exactly
have
right.
their own clothes. They're you literally wearing other people's property.
Exactly. And they often, we have particularly found this with adolescents. They don't know. They don't know if you ask them about human trafficking. They don't even know what you're talking about.
Right.
I mean, that's that's not talk that you talk with victims about. You ask them about their lives, and they talk. One of our first rules is that you shut up and listen. Isn't
Yep.
that
Exactly.
terrible to say? But I mean, it's like you have to do that. You don't use language that is your language. You lose what is happening in your life.
Right.
You know, one of the signs, if you talk about a sign, is where do you live? They don't know where you live because they live at different
Exactly.
places.
Exactly. Or what's your phone number? They don't know because they don't have a phone.
Exactly.
Right. Or what about even having poor hygiene?
Oh, oh, we could talk about that, but probably not on the phone and certainly not on the radio.
Oh well, this is internet radio. We can talk, swear, curse, and do whatever we want here. We keep it real, Jane.
Oh, okay. Then hygiene is really, really important because, again, traffickers don't spend money on personal items that, for instance, women need. They don't.
Mhm.
So what do I do? Well, then I just create these things, and it's really bad. There are terrible infections. That's one reason why the emergency room is so important, because they go to the emergency room, females, because of female hygiene issues
Mhm.
that cause disease. And when someone comes in with that, there should be attention to what it is. We recently had a ER physician in Southfield, and one of the issues that he had was he had just been to a human trafficking mandated 1 hour course.
Oh,
And someone
Jane, you
came.
know, we're getting some interference here, and it's almost time for us to end our show. We're going to have you come back and revisit this issue of human trafficking. We
Oh,
know
good.
that January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, so we wanted to get in front of it, but we are definitely going to have you come back in. And, you know, our audience, you have been watching In Session live on WJZZ Cool TV, the coolest radio station in the world. And we are always streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitch. So please like, share, follow, and subscribe. And tune in next week for another episode of In Session with Dr. T and Fishta.
You guys are terrific. I wish you were here in other places in Michigan.
Yeah. Jane, thank you so much for what you do out there, and you are a wealth of information, and truly appreciate you.
Thank you so much, you guys. You're wonderful.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Bye-bye.